Mayor, Commissioners, this is the September briefing. As we do with our quarterly briefings, we also will include a briefing from water with regards to water funds, water sewer funds, and the air. Oh, all right, and the airport funds. So I will now turn it over to Ms. Jones.
Thank you, City Manager. Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners.
Hello.
As the City Manager mentioned, we will start with the general funds quarter 3 results. We'll start with the short statement here. We'll walk through briefly the revenues, various categories and revenues and expenditure before we dive deeper into details for each of those categories. As for the total sources for quarter 3, as you can see here, sources were $3.5 million lower compared to year-to-date budget and nearly $300,000 higher compared to 2024 for the same period. Sources includes the sources that we're going to talk through today includes income tax, property tax, waste collection, local government fund, and other revenues. And as you can see here, income tax is 3.9% or $4.9 million lower. Deeper into the income tax in the next slide. For property tax and other taxes, they are $10.7 million above 2024 amount, and this is largely due to the millage rate change. We'll also discuss that more in detail. For waste collection, we are seeing a 0.6% increase. Our CPI for waste collection, we do an adjustment in the rate annually. For 2025, rate adjustment was 2.6%. We are seeing just a slight increase in waste collection, and that has largely to do with the billed credits. We'll dive deeper into waste collection in a little bit too. For local government fund, we are seeing a big increase of $2.4 million year over year, and this is largely due to the us meeting the prior obligations for revenue collected through the photo enforcement program. And so now we have caught up, and we are simply getting the reduction for the past 12 months. That's why we're seeing this big increase in 2025. For other revenue, we are seeing 21.6% decline. This is only 2 categories are seeing decline. One is income tax and the other is the other revenue. The other revenue is largely due to the transfer that's booked. Last year, we did $5 million in transfer in to the general fund from the photo enforcement fund, and this year that transfer is $3.8 million. So that's why we're seeing that decline in other revenue. For total uses, they are down compared to budget by $3.4 million. However, they are up $14.3 million or 8.8% compared to 2024 amounts. Personnel costs are up 6.4% or $7.2 million. Largely in personnel costs, the $7.2 million is reflective of civilian wage growth, which is approximately $2.3 million, and sworn wages grew about $3.6 million. For contracts and materials and other uses, we saw 12% growth or $4 million year over year. Contracts and material largely went up due to the RDC payment, NATO expenses, as well as our payment to the Miami Conservancy District, the tax payment for the levee protection system. For the other uses, which includes transfers, we have done most of those transfers. We have few transfers that are remaining to be done that will be done at the end of the year, which includes the 27th pay. It also includes the employee professional development, which is about $580,000, which supports the employee professional development for the organization, which is carried out by HR department, but it also includes $300,000 for the fire department, which funds the paramedic training program. Most of the transfers, as I said, are done earlier in the year. This is to allow adequate time for procurement, and so they are completed in the beginning of the year. The other thing I want to point out in the transfer section or the investment section is the Your Dollars, Your Neighborhood. As you can see, it's up 28.7%, and this is largely due to the change in allocation from issue 9 to issue 6. We did increase resurfacing. It was previously $3.4 million. Now it's $5.9 million. And then we also added the new housing program, which is $650,000. So that's why we're seeing the change in Your Dollars, Your Neighborhood. All in all, at the end, uses exceeded sources by $5.8 million at the end of third quarter. All right, for income tax, as I said previously, overall income tax collections were down $4.9 million or 3.9%. Withholding collections, they are increased slightly, about $800,000 compared to 2024. Tax on business profits declined by 32.5%, or $6 million. This has largely to do with the one-time payment that we received in July of 2024. As I was saying, so business profits saw the biggest decline, 32.5%, and that has to do with the one-time payment in business profits that we received in July of 2024. That is not present in 2025, and so that's why we're seeing that large decline in business profits. For individuals, individuals increased by 8.4% or $354,000. In addition to the three categories, refunds also saw a slight increase year over year. It's not huge, but it's increased by about 1.3%. And then the other thing to note here is that 2024 has one additional 5 Friday month as opposed to 2025. And so that's adding to the overall decline in 2025. I also want to point out the correlation between the table and the chart. As you can see in the chart, business profits as percentage of total income tax collection was much higher in 2022. It was 16.4%, and in 2024 it was 14.5%. And as you can see in the table, in 2022, we noted a big payment in business profits in the month of April. It was $6.7 million. And then again, in 2024, we saw a similar thing happen, $6.8 million in July. If it's not for that, business profits is hovering between 10 to 12% of the total income tax collection. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Jeanette, and Jeanette is going to walk us through revenue and expenditures.
Thank you very much. We're going to start with property taxes for our first revenue category that we'll dive into. As Abby mentioned, this is up about 10.7% or $894,000. So when we met with you in our previous finance committee briefings, we were kind of saying that the county had been adjusting our advance payments. We get advances until they settle up twice a year. They increased the advances to align with that property revaluation. But then, right, as of now, we have all of our advances and all of our settlements. So this is truly kind of apples to apples when we compare it to 2024. So really the change that we wanted to highlight here in the table below, as we've mentioned before, we changed for 2025 the millage split. So previously it was 4.5 bills going to the general fund and then 5.5 going to bond retirement. But in 2025, it is a 5 and a 5 split. So 50% is going to either source. And so that is truly the driver in terms of the property tax revenue going up over 10%, almost 11% in 2025. We're really seeing that difference because of the millage split. Property valuations are basically the same from last year because, you know, next year will be the property revaluation. We'll see the increase, the bump the following years after that. So just wanted to highlight this is truly because of the millage split and the distribution to the general fund. All right, and then next we wanted to highlight waste collection. Abby mentioned this, but waste collection revenue today cuts to year-over-year change in CPI, and I'm sure you've noticed that it's kind of a down a little bit. So it's just around 2%, around 3% currently. And so we would expect that to be realized as well when you look at the Dayton revenue line. And so you can see for Dayton customers, revenue in waste collection in the waste collection category has only gone up about 0.6%. And so what we are seeing is a higher proportion of credits given in 2025. And so that is driving down the revenue collections for 2025. So that's really the difference, but you're not seeing it go up about 2% as well, in line with the CPI change. So in the other categories for Jefferson Township and Moraine, there have been minimal changes from year to year. So those are very minimal, but that is the driving factor why overall for waste collection, it's only going up just under 1%, not quite the 2% that we would expect based on that CPI increase. And then local government fund, I know we talked this one through a lot, but we want to highlight it again because the local government fund revenue did go up $2.4 million over 2024. As we've talked about before, it's because of those traffic enforcement camera reductions that are made at the state level. And you can really see it in the chart to the right. So that kind of orange kind of downward bar chart are the reductions that we've received from our local government fund revenue. And you can see it really peaked in 2024 because we were meeting those prior year obligations because of the delays in terms of how we had to report multiple years worth of revenue. And so it has gone down in 2025. This is more of like a normal occurrence in terms of the revenue that we've reported. So there are some fewer cameras out there, you know, the ones that are outside of school zones. So that is also some of the reason why it's lower, but you can see we took about a $6 million reduction in 2024, and we're at about $4 million as of 2025. And so that's really why we're seeing an increase in revenue. All right, and then our other kind of catch-all categories or other revenue, just kind of highlight something. So the other revenue category, if we exclude those transfers that gone up about 13.7% compared to 2024. And then looking at the transfer in line, if we include that, it's down about 21.6%. And so the driving factor there is that transfer in line. Abby mentioned this, but that is the transfer in from the photo enforcement fund or prior photo enforcement fund. It was about $5 million to transfer in 2024 versus that $3.8 million in 2025. So that is really the driving factor why overall you're seeing that dip. Some other areas that we've seen some changes, the cable franchise fee. So you will see that is down about 32.5%. So it's a couple things. So there's a timing lag in terms of the postings that we've received for the revenue. There are fewer postings this year compared to last year. And then one of the things we're noticing as we dig into this, the revenue overall for the cable franchise fees has kind of been trending down. Typically by the end of the year, we'll see about $1 million, at least in the past, we've seen about $1 million for cable franchise fee revenue, but that has kind of been slowly eking down over these past years, especially this year we're noticing. So you can see we're kind of lagging behind a little bit on the revenue, but then it's also largely due to that timing of fewer revenue distributions that we posted. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight, refunds and recoveries, that one is also down $118,000, almost $200 from 2024. And that is because in 2024, there was a revenue distribution for civil service administration fees that have not yet occurred in 2025. So we're seeing that difference because it's just not just based on the timing in terms of when we're realizing that payment. And that's really the driving factor compared to 2024. Okay, switching to the expenses. So on the personnel cost side, personnel costs are up 6.4% or $7.2 million. And the driving factor here is largely in the wage category, both civilian and sworn. So you can see on the civilian side, civilian wages are up about $2.3 million. This is due to, there are more filled positions, but also the annual budgeted wage inflation that we account for every single year with positions. Overtime has gone down a little bit. And so we noticed overtime really kind of creeped down in the waste collection division. So they are utilizing less overtime in 2025. And that's the driving factor for that dip in overtime from the civilian side. On the sworn wages side, that is up about $3 million. So some of that has to do with the contractual wage increases for police that happened a little bit later last year in the year. But then also the recruit classes for police and fire, they occurred earlier in 2025. So you're seeing those expenses occur earlier in the year for 2025. Additionally, there were more police recruits who graduated that we were seeing in 2025. So that's driving up some of those expenses. You'll notice also with the insurance line, that's the other thing I want to highlight, that is down $1.1 million or 8.3%. So we took a health insurance holiday in July or June of this year, sorry. So that is really the driving factor in terms of why health insurance costs are down when compared to 2024. And then contracts and materials. So contract materials often goods other uses or other transfers in totality have gone up about 12%. And if we exclude those other transfers, materials by themselves have gone up about 8% or $40. And so some of that driving factor is in the management public service contract line. So that is where the regional dispatch center contract comes out of. And as Abby mentioned, it's the timing. There are fewer payments in 2024 when compared to 2025, typically billed quarterly. So we're just seeing that lag a little bit last year. That's really driving up that increase. The miscellaneous line, that is where you'll see most of the NATO related expenses. That is driving up that $1.5 million increase, almost $1.6 million, sorry, increase from 2024. And then payments to internal services, they are also up. So the driving factor here, they're fleet charges. So typically in our police and waste collection divisions, they are seeing higher fleet charges. They still have higher needs for their in-service vehicles that we're seeing, and those expenses are going up. And then supplies and materials and maintenance, we kind of looked at them together because the real driver there are kind of technology related expenses. So purchases of computers because they're end of life for the like Windows 10 conversion, and then also just technology contracts, inflationary increases are reflected in there as well. So that's, and then as we've mentioned before quite a bit, the utility category is going down about $164,000. And really what's happening there is that delay of payment to AES based on those billing error issues. So that should kind of, that difference should kind of start to minimize once we start getting those corrected bills and paying those electricity bills. Okay, I will give it back to Abby.
All right, so we'll talk through the big picture for revenue and expenditures to look at the trend line over the last 5 years. As you can see here, income tax is the largest source of revenue for the general fund. Income tax was almost 74% of the total revenue in 2021. And in 2025, income tax is nearly 71% of the total revenue. All other revenue categories, they have grown almost 28% since 2021. And some of the noteworthy items include property taxes, starting with property taxes, which are up $2.7 million or 40.9%. As Jeanette mentioned, the property taxes are up due to the reevaluation that occurred in 2023. That's why we're seeing that big increase. For the EMS revenue category, we're seeing almost 54% increase over the 5-year period. And this has to do with the Medicare rate change and the increased run volume that we have experienced over the last few years. For the local government fund, we saw the decline of 55.3% or $3.3 million. And this, again, as Jeanette mentioned, about the photo enforcement fund revenue, where we're seeing the reduction in local government fund. That's the largest driver for that local government fund decline over the 5-year period. And then the decline in the local government fund, to offset that decline, we started to deposit the photo enforcement revenue directly into the general fund starting in 2025, so that general fund is not taking that direct hit. Previously, this revenue was deposited into a special project fund. And in that scenario, general fund was truly seeing that reduction in total revenue. And so that's why we did that switch in 2025 to make the general fund. As for the expenditure trend over the last 5 years, personnel on contract services combined have increased by 37.5 million, 31.6%. Personnel makes up 25.5 million of that growth, which is largely driven by the annual wage inflation, as well as we mentioned the more field positions. We're also seeing higher overtime, especially for the frontline services, and then the 2025 NATO-related staffing also added to that cost in 2025. For contracts and material and other uses, we saw a 46.8% increase over the 5-year, or nearly $12 million. This is largely due to the inflationary increases that we've seen over the last 5 years, along with we've added some new services. To name a few, it's the court security service that we added for the courts that is contracted via the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office, as well as we increased our security services for City Hall. And then, as Jeanette mentioned, we are also seeing increases in our technology cost in the maintenance agreement, as well as purchasing of technology. And again, NATO supplies that are booked in the contracts material for 2025 is also adding to that growth. All right, so this is our Dayton Recovery Plan update. This is through October 29th. There are a total of 60 projects in the Dayton Recovery Plan. 9 of these projects have been completed and 4 are expected to be completed in the next few weeks. As you can see here, the total awarded contracts are nearly $90 million. And so far we have spent $54.8 million of that. The total MBE goal in the entire Dayton Recovery Plan is $23.1 million, and we have achieved $22.1 million, which is a 96% compliance rate. This is a really good news story. The organization is working hard to ensure that we're meeting this compliance rate for the goal that is set for each of these projects. Diving a little bit deeper into the different project categories. You can also view the additional detail related to each project that is listed in the subcategory by visiting the Dayton Recovery Plan dashboard. The link is listed at the bottom of the page. There are a total of 4 projects that are remaining to be awarded. But before I talk about that, let me highlight real quick. As you can see here, we have spent nearly half of our total allocation, which is $102 million. The organization has speed up in spending, which we expected that would happen. In the beginning, it took us a little bit of time to get through the contracts and the awards, but now that those are in place for most of them, we are moving quickly through spending those dollars. In Q3 of 2025 alone, nearly $10.2 million in expenses were processed. 4 projects are remaining to be awarded out of all of the 60 projects that are listed in the Dayton Recovery Plan. One is the United Church Homes home project, which is $1.5 million. The grantee needed to reapply for the historic tax credit, which they did in September of 2025. They are awaiting to hear back, and they're projecting that they will receive that news sometime in December. And so as soon as they receive that information, we will move forward with the contract for this specific project. The other project is the pool house at Fairview, which is nearly $600,000. The demolition of the pool house is pending. The finalization of the splash pad design for the spray park improvement. The Recreation Department is also working with vendor on solutions for the pool house plumbing redesign. And so there are a few moving pieces for this specific project. As soon as those are resolved, then this project will also move forward. We also have a $115,000 allocated for MBE compliance tool, which is a software we're in the process of purchasing. This software will support the city's efforts to engage diverse businesses in compliance. And so we are in the process of doing the negotiations, and hopefully this will move forward here in the near future. And then lastly, the fourth project is the safe and secure housing. You have heard about that administrative process, which has started. The piece that is in the Dayton Recovery Plan is approximately $200,000 for the technology purchase. And that is the procurement of the third-party software, which is currently in development. All right.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Patel Jones, typically, for project homestead aids.
Safe and secure housing is the name of the project. That is the administrative hearing process. The administrative hearing process for housing code enforcement.
Thank you.
All right, so this is our quarterly compliance for the departments in the general fund. As you can see here, at the third quarter, the total general fund expenditures and transfers account for 75% of the total annual budget, which is where we expect to be at the end of the third quarter at about 75%. As you can see here, most departments are performing within the expected variance, with the exception of fire, police, and your dollars, your neighborhood. The variance for the fire and police department is largely due to the higher overtime costs that we've experienced for the first 3 quarters. Again, the overtime related to NATO is also impacting this higher variance for police and fire both. As well as the additional overtime that is needed in the fire department to ensure that minimum staffing requirements are met on a daily basis. For your dollars, your neighborhood, we're seeing this variance largely due to the front loading of the investment. We do the transfers earlier in the year, and so that's why we're seeing the 93.5% variance for the your dollars, your neighborhood. All right, so employment for the Dayton MSA, before I start, this data is as of August. Because of the federal government shutdown, the data is only reported through August, and so that is all we have to report today for this employment. And as you can see here, employment in the Dayton region peaked in July of 2024, and then fell for the next 4 months relative to the pre-pandemic levels from 2019. Job counts rebounded in December of 2024. As you can see here, we saw that steep peak from November to December, but then it fell by 900 jobs in January. However, since February, we have seen a steady growth month over month in employment, with August seeing a slight decline of $300,000 compared to the prior month. Excuse me, not $300,000, 300 jobs compared to the prior month. In comparison to the peak in February 2020, the job counts are 5,900 higher than the low point that we saw, where we lost nearly 15.5% of the job base, or 60,900 jobs in 1 month. And as I said, this data, even for August, is preliminary, and so it is subject to change. For our economic indicators, the first chart shows the job growth in comparison to the job growth for the state of Ohio. And as you can see here, Dayton region was mostly flat from February to May, relative to month over month change. Employment did rebound in the summer months of June and July, and then retreated by 300 jobs in August. The Dayton region is tracking behind state employment growth, registering at 1.5% growth. since February peak of 2020, while the state of Ohio is registering at 2.1%. So we're slightly behind the state of Ohio. The next chart shows the projected furloughed employees in the federal government due to the federal government shutdown. The Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is our which is the largest federal employer we have in the region, employs over 30,000 employees, which includes civilians, military personnel, and contractors. The workforce is primarily part of the U.S. Department of Defense. And as you can see in the chart here, the Department of Defense, part of the RBC Economic Research, approximately half of the employees have been furloughed due to the U.S. government shutdown. So until we receive the updated data, it is really hard to tell the impact on the Dayton region from this movement that is happening in the current economy. But we wanted to show, based on the research, what the impact is from the federal government shutdown. For the GDP, nationwide GDP declined by 0.6% in the first quarter of 2025. Growing to 3.8% in the second quarter, based on the Conference Board research, which is the chart in the middle you see there, is showing the projections for the GDP for the third quarter and fourth quarter. And as you can see here, the growth is predicted to slow in the third and fourth quarter of 2025. Majority of the growth that we saw in the second quarter came from lower imports with acceleration in consumer spending, which was offset by reduced investments. Uncertainty related to the increased tariffs, as well as the U.S. government shutdown, are expected to slow the growth in the quarter three and quarter four, excuse me. It is estimated that based on the research, economic research that we did, it is estimated that a partial government shutdown reduces GDP growth by about 0.1 to 0.2% percentage point per week. For context, a shutdown that lasts an entire quarter, which has never happened before, but if it were to happen, it would reduce the real GDP growth by 1.2 to 2.4 percentage point. The last chart shows the CPI. Year-over-year inflation is 3%, which is up from 2.4% this time last year. So as we can see here, it is up by about 0.6 percentage point year over year. Energy cost, including gasoline, electricity, and natural gas, rose 2.8%, while food saw an increase of about 3.1%. And so it averages out to 3% for both all items and all items excluding food and energy. For the general fund highlights, total revenues to date are performing $3.5 million below the budget. This is primarily due to the delayed NATO reimbursement. We're still waiting from the state to receive the reimbursement, although we have expensed the on personnel and contracts and material. We're still waiting to receive those reimbursements, along with the lower income tax collections that we are seeing this year in comparison to last year, which is what really is driving that $3.5 million reduction year over year. Personnel costs increased 6.4% in 2025. This is reflective of the wage growth, our annual wage growth, more filled positions, and increased overtime not only related to NATO, but also, as I mentioned, there is increased overtime in the fire department so that we can maintain the minimum staffing levels on a daily basis. This increase is partially offset by that health insurance holiday, which took place in June of this year. For contracts and material and other uses, these are up 12%, largely due to what Jeanette talked about, the RDC payment, NATO, and the higher Miami Conservancy District tax payment for the flood protection system. This was nearly $900,000 higher this year compared to last year. And again, these increases were offset by the utility cost for IGS and AES. At the end of September, uses exceeded sources by $5.8 million due to the slight decline in income tax revenue and the continued growth that we're seeing in both personnel and contracts and material. Because of this continued growth, ongoing wage and cost inflation underscores the need for continued prudent monitoring of the general fund, not only through 2025, but we also need to make sure that we continue to monitor this beyond 2025 and to make sure that we have a balanced budget on an annual basis. With that, take any questions.
Okay, questions?
No, thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You
All right, next we will have our water department, and their third quarter.
Hello, Commissioner, Mayor, City Manager, every day.
It's actually quite on today.
Good afternoon.
Here today to present the third quarter finance briefing for water and sanitary funds. Everything performed as expected for us for the third quarter as compared to 2024 third quarter. We had our normal things with our suspended solids, our line. Revenues were up, but for us overall, everything was the same as it was last year.
Okay, so starting with our sources and uses statement, this provides a summary of how our revenues are performing against our expenditures or against. And then we also look at over year-over-year comparisons to see if there are any variances or nuances. So starting first for our sources or revenues with our largest revenue category, which is City of Dayton customers. First, we always like to look at our budget performance, and so that's in the upper left quadrant of the chart to see how we are performing against what we were going to do. And we are only 120,000 below our budget, so that is excellent budget performance thanks to those rate models that we've been discussing. The utility, when we look at year over year, experienced a 7.9% increase from this time last year, or $1.9 million from city customers. This is right in line with our rate increases, which we expected. Our second largest revenue category is revenues from other jurisdictions, which were $1.6 million above budget forecast. This isn't indicative of a budgeting issue. It is in fact favorable bill timing, which happens and smooths out year over year. Looking at our actual revenue performance, year over year experienced a 9.3% increase from this time last year, also $1.9 million. Another major revenue category that we'd like to highlight here is our lime sales, which increased 16.8%, driven by rate increases and higher overall sales volumes. We'll go over details of some nuances in the following slides. And then looking at our expenditures or uses, up in total 11.5% or 5.1 when we compare to this time last year. That's largely due to capital cash transfer timing, higher contracts and materials costs, and personnel costs increase. So looking at one of our largest expense categories, which is personnel, year over year, 6.4% higher, and that was due to filled positions and overtime. We'll go into those details in a moment. A second large category is contracts and materials, and year over year, 6.3% higher when compared to 2024. And that's largely due to higher fleet expenses, like we saw in the general fund, sludge disposal costs, which are expected, and supplies and materials. We did have some offsets, and so that was the delay in paying IGS and AES. We have started processing those in this quarter, so that offset gap will obviously reduce as we start to pay those, and so we'll be prepared for that to report on in the next quarter. And as we love to see in the third quarter, we did not use cash reserves. Our sources, our revenues exceeded our uses to a tune of $2.5 million. That gap will close once we start paying those IGS.
So as we get into the details, okay. So as we get into the details of what some of those increases, again, as we said, we performed better than expected. When we're looking at our city and other jurisdictions, when we look at the city customers, you see that we're up by about 7.9%, but that also includes that 9% rate increase that was mentioned before. When you're looking at other customers outside of the city or other jurisdictions, which are mainly the county, this is also including increase in actual usage that we had there, but also we had additional billing as well. So we did have some increased revenue and increased usage. When we're looking at our line files, as we talked about before, you have our producer price index that will generate whether we have a rate increase or not. For 2025, that was about 13%, and this is something that we expect to happen every year. But we also had some additional orders, which shows that we have some customers that are going in and ordering additional lime, and we'll see the impact of that when we talk about expenses, when we look at our residual cost on the next slide. When we're looking at some of our other charges, those are up as well. And this is where we've been going after some of the property tax, and we're starting to collect those sooner. And this is in the area of our source water protection program, which is where you're starting to see that increase of that 5.6%. When we're looking at other revenues, you also have a decrease there, and this is due to some bill timing, and also we had a lease that was in later along with some of our administrative costs based upon how we bill the water and uses for personnel. When we're looking over at expenditures, again, we're looking at the wages that we're paying, the wages that we're paying. As you can see here, those were up by 6.3%. Part of this increase is because we're actually starting to fill positions, which is always good because for several quarters, we talked about our inability to fill positions. So this is a good sign for us. However, a part of the problem is that we're still having an increase in overtime as we're struggling to fill those 24-hour positions that you will have. Hopefully that will start to turn as we continue. We did have some decreases in insurance as well, and Abby stated before, this is due to that insurance. As we're looking over at our contracts and materials, those are up as well. And this is due to some of our supplies. As we're going through, you'll see that you have some flow meter upgrades over in the well field. These upgrades are helping to make sure that the tracking of the flow coming out of the well field is more accurate. But also you're seeing that we're having some replacement projects of our AMI meters, which is how we AMR as we go through and we actually read the meters out in Trotwood and Brookville. We're starting to go through and make some repairs as those meters are starting to. If you look at our sludge disposal, our residual disposal, if you're on the water side, you also see that we have an increase there as well. And this is tied to the increase in the amount of lime cells you have based upon our intergovernmental agreement. You're going to see an increase in the amount of residuals that we are contractually required to remove. You're also going to see a normal CPI increase as well, which is making up a part of that, a little bit under $100,000 increase. For professional services, what you have are some repairs that were performed at the pump station, which are more on the preventative side and linked to electrical, and then also well field maintenance. Some of this is linked to some of the flow meter repairs and all those repairs to some. If you're looking at our other expenses, again, you have some other improvements, some of it's security improvements. We've also had some maintenance at our live reclamation facility, which is something that we do every quarter, and you're just starting to see it show up here. And then if you look at the offset, again, this is due to the bill timing IGS. And hopefully when we get to fourth quarter, we'll no longer say that this is a set.
Okay, and moving on to our sanitary fund, our sources and uses statement again, where we're comparing our revenues over expenses and then looking at year-over-year changes between the categories. Starting first with our revenues or sources, overall up 6.9% or 2.4 million when we compare Q3 2024 to Q3 of 2025. Again, starting with our largest revenue category, which is city customers. We like to look at that budget performance. And as we did on the water side, we also did very well on the sewer side. In our budgeting, we are only up $22,000, $22,400 for our budget variances. But when we look at year over year, comparing this time last year, there's a 4.2% revenue increase in this category of almost $712,000. Our second largest category for the sewer utility is revenues from other jurisdictions. That same as water, up above forecast of 19.7% or 2.3 million, not indicative of a budgeting issue, but we had favorable bill timing in this particular quarter. Essentially, we had a couple extra bills that were from large metered accounts. When we look at year over year in this category, similar to the water side, we experienced an 11.7% increase or 1.4 million. That was impacted by rate increases as well as higher revenues in certain accounts. And so we'll go into those details in a moment. Another major category is other charges for services. This was down 1.6% or 92,100 when we compare to this time last year. That's due to lower suspended solids charges. We'll go into those details. It was a variance actually in the prior year. Now we're normalizing in this year. And that was also offset by higher BOD demand. We've been talking about this for quite some time. Another large category is other revenues. That was up 21.9% when we compare to this time last year. And that was due to revenues from our RNG project out at Water Reclamation. Looking at our uses or expenditures overall, down 5.4% or 1.7 million, largely due to capital cash transfer timing, contracts and materials, and capital equipment purchases. Personnel costs were actually down 1.2%. We'll go into some details about that in a moment. Contracts and materials also down. Really, the driver of that is the timing of those IGS payments that will correct in the coming quarter. Capital improvements down 10.5%. That's simply due to the timing of cash transfers, not an indicator that we're sort of changing anything about our capital programming. That'll normalize by the end of the year. And then cash reserves were not required in this quarter, which is excellent. We don't expect to see that next quarter once we start paying those energy bills.
So as we go into the detail again, our revenue were up about 7% for both city customers and outside customers. Part of that increase in the sources that you see here are revenue partially rate increases, but also additional uses you're seeing along with some bill timing. There's been some additional bills that were read during this quarter as compared to 2020. When we're looking at other revenues that are up, this is due to that RNG project that we've been talking about over at Water Reclamation. However, I want to caution that yes, it's up for this year. As we continue to go along and the natural gas costs start to equal out, we probably won't see such a huge increase. But for right now, we are seeing that 21% increase. Also, some of our other charges, as we talked about the suspended solids that are decreasing and our biological oxygen demand is going up. This is all due to our industrial customers, and these charges are based upon the impact that it has to our treatment processes we go through at the Water Reclamation facility. As we look at some of the expenditures, these are actually lower for us, about 1.6%. Part of this is due to the fact that we have some decreases in our wages over at Water Reclamation. But this is also due to some of the vacancies as we've had some turnover, and this will probably change as we go along. But we do still have that overtime increase. And this is due to the fact that similar on the water side, that 24-hour operation, we're still struggling to get those skilled labor groups in. When you look at the insurance holiday, again, this is the same that we've seen for both the general fund and on the water side. When we're looking at the utilities, again, these are down, but we hope that this will change for the fourth quarter as we move through. As we're looking at the administrative timing, again, some of this is just a little bit of administrative cost. And if we look at the whole refit reverse flood on the wastewater side, again, we had our normal CPI increase, but we also had some weather. So generally, the sludge that you see from our wastewater treatment plants, we usually tend to put those on farmers' fields to get that beneficial reuse. But if you have wetter seasons, we end up having to landfill them, which comes at an increased cost for us. If you look at our fleet charges, those are also higher, but this is due to the efficiency that we're starting to see at our fleet maintenance group. So we're starting to get our equipment back quicker. So this is actually a good thing. And then if you look at our other supplies and materials, those are up, but this is due to us completing a project on our Broadway pump station. So last quarter, I talked about we got in some pumps and motors. This quarter, we got in a variable frequency drive, which is a part of how we operate those motors. And then that's the cost that you see of that, about $160,000. Revenue were up in quarter three as compared to 2024, and this is both on the city side and then our other jurisdictions. This is due to some rate increases, some other revenue categories, especially line and revenue, gas on the sewer side. Personnel was also up in the water side. This is due that we're starting to fill our positions, which is always good, but we do have some vacancies that are remaining that's driving the increase that you're seeing. We expect that we'll continue to do that offset as we go through to the fourth quarter. And then if you look at our contracts and materials, those are also up, and this is due to the residual removal, but also some of our supplies and materials are up as well. We did see some decrease in our bill timing. Some of these decreases were in bill timing and other professional services. But all this was offset by the IGS payments that we have not made. But in the fourth quarter, we're hoping that that will change. Again, for water and sewer, we did not have to use our cash balances through the, which was what was expected.
Questions? No?
Well, I just have one. It's about, I'm really glad to see that we have better fleet availability. That's a great number. What is the effects of that? Is it just that people have vehicles available, they don't have to wait? Or in the future, if this continues, will we be able to reduce fleet? Can we look that far ahead yet, or is it just too early? Yeah.
We can't look that far ahead, but for us, for operational efficiency, it's great to have our vehicles back in a more timely manner.
Great. It's good news.
We're good.
Thank you. Next up is aviation.
Well, good afternoon, Gil Turner, Director of Aviation. About third quarter results. First of all, payments are still up in this third quarter, up about 3.3%, about almost 500,000 in payments. So, I'm sorry. All right. So our payments are up about 32% compared to last year, so roughly about 494,000 passengers for the third quarter. So we're happy about that, but we're not really sure what's going to happen in the fourth quarter. It's going to be the government shutdown. So we're optimistic that we got to get them back home before the holiday season. Our PSA people are still showing up to work. Air traffic control is showing up to work. A lot of airports are experiencing delays, some delays about 4 hours. So this is really unprecedented to go through this type of government shutdown. We're optimistic that something's going to change. for holidays. So, our airline revenues are down roughly about 120,000 or 1.8%. And this is not a surprise to us. We, every year we raise some charges. We actually lowered the rate for the terminal rental rate in the terminal. So this is why we're seeing a decrease in revenue. Also, we've also a tenant in Wisconsin. They were flying for American and United last year, but they lost a contract. So now we don't have them any longer in the terminal. So that's what a decrease in the airline revenues. Non-airline revenues up about 2.6 million or 18.7. This is all parking. We did several increases over this year to increase our revenues for parking. So we're up about 665,000 or 10.6%. Also the rental cost. So I think I told you last quarter there was an adjustment given during the pandemic. There was some issue with the billing, and we were able to get it settled. And so that settlement increase hit this year. So we're not in total with revenue for a rental car, but this is due to the settlement. So roughly about $1.2 million or 50.2%. Also concession. So concessions up about 116,000 or 13.6%. I'm excited for next year because I think we're going to do better. We're bringing in new concessions in the airport, Green, Dunkin' Donut, Pizza Shop, remodeling all of the restaurants and concourses, roughly about a $2 million investment. Total sources up about 2.5 million, 10.6% compared to 2024, and we're 1.1 million or 4.6% higher than year-to-date budget. Total uses have decreased by 75,000 or 0.3% compared to 2024, and about 1.1 million or 4.2% under budget. Personnel costs of about 755,000 or 9.9%, but we remain about 103,000 or 1.2 below year-to-date budget. Capital projects are down about 559,000 due to timing and recovery funds. Also, some of the bids that we have for the projects came a little bit lower this year, so we're kind of surprised about that. So we didn't have to use them for capital projects. Contract material and other uses are up by 92,000 or 0.9%, for about 997,000 basis by a little bit.
Was review your last quarter, I might say like a second one, but it's a big story. We can start with operating revenue trends. Pull it towards you, please. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay.
Good.
Okay, good. So within operating revenue, airline revenue is down about 120,000 or 1%. Because of the settle ups with the airlines that occurred in January, the loss of a few tenants at the airport, like as Gail mentioned, in Wisconsin, and because lower terminal rental rates. Non-airline revenue is up about 2.6 million or 18.7%. And that's because of the rental car revenue, the parking revenue, an increase to the CFC rate, and concession sales being higher, which we'll talk about further in the next couple of slides. So within airline revenue, you can see that terminal space rent decreased about 179,000 or 4.5%. And that's because of lower rental rates that we've had this year. The rate went from $78.41 per square foot to $77.33, about $1 and some change less. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because it means we're controlling our operating cost. So as our operating costs come down, we reduce our rental rates. And that's good for the airlines too because it keeps them happy. And then there's the annual settlement, which we have talked about every quarter since the beginning of the year. Just for comparison, this year was about $91,000. Last year was about $102,000. So pretty much in the ballpark. Again, this is related to us truing up our operating costs and keeping those operating costs low. Also, because we have to have audited financial statements for us to do this analysis, the settlements are actually 2 years behind. So the settlement we did this year is actually from 2023. And then landing fees are up about 59,000 or 2.2%. And that's because of the increase we've seen in employments and because of the large aircraft now operating at the airport, larger aircraft. Looking at non-airline revenue, you can see we're at about $2.6 million, or 18.7% overall. Parking is up $665,000, 10.6%, and that's because of increased rates and increased usage. Now, when you hear we're raising our rates, you might think this is bad. I do want to mention that we still have very competitive rates compared to other airports our size. Rental car revenue is up 1.1 million, or 50.2%. And that's because of, again, the settle ups with the rental car agencies from past years. And additionally, we had a settle up mid-year this year. In total, we've received about $992,000 over the minimum annual guarantee in the agreement we have with the rental car companies. And that's from the past few years and from this year. And we plan to continue to settle up with the rental car companies on a monthly basis going forward, just so we can stay on top of this. Concessions are up 116,000, or 13.6%. That's because we've been actively staffing the shops and restaurants and keeping them open longer, which leads to better sales. And then property tax payments are up about 430,000, or 43.6%. This is actually the property tax that we collect from our tenants. And that's because of one particular tenant at the Dayton Rutgers Airport who, in the past 3 years, constructed a new. The properties are assessed every 3 years, and then the reassessment came with a large bill to us. So we paid it, but we did bill it back to the tenant. Ground leases are up 278,000, or 17.9%, and that's because of the new tenants we have at the airport, like Sierra Nevada and Joby. And then we also have some escalators in our contracts, which we've activated recently. And other non-airline revenue is down about 26,000, or 1.3%, which this is kind of a mixed bag of a bunch of different things, but mainly it's due to the lower rental rates and lower interest earned on investment. Moving over to the expense side, personnel costs are up about 755,000, or 9.9% year over year. That's because of wages, fringes, and insurance. Wages are up 597,000, or 12.3%, and it's partly due to us being more fully staffed than last year, the timing of when we acquired the garage at the airport, and general wage inflation. It is not because of new positions, but we are filling existing positions that have been vacant. These roles have all been budgeted for. Overtime is down 37,000, or 8.7%. And again, that's because we're more fully staffed, so we're assigning less overtime. And then fringes are up 137,000, or 11.3%, which is consistent with wage inflation. Okay, moving over to contracts and materials. Total contracts and materials are up about 92,000, 0.9%. There's a number of reasons for that. First, maintenance is down 128,000, or 6.1%. That's because we acquired the garage in 2024, so we aren't getting billed internally for these services anymore. Marketing is down 111,000, or 16.2%. And that's because of the timing of payments to the Chamber of Commerce. That will get caught up. We're actually investing more resources into our marketing efforts, including a new advertising strategy, comprehensive rebranding initiative aimed at increasing visibility and engagement at the airport as of 2026. Professional services are down about 370,000, or 21.8%. And that's because being that we're more fully staffed, we've had to use less temporary staff to fill vacant roles. And then there's also one timing of a payment to event that's affecting that, so that will get paid. Okay, taxes are up 466,000, or 35.4%. And again, we talked about this. The building belongs to the Connor Group down at the Wright Brothers Airport. And this is just a pass-through expense to us. Utilities are down 296,000, or 18.3%. And that's because of the issues we're having with AES, which is citywide. We're not supposed to be paying these bills until AES gets their issues resolved. Some good news, in the last quarter, we caught up on our IGS bills, which have a similar issue related to AES because they're a supplier. So now we're just waiting on AES to get everything fixed, and then we will get caught up with them. And then the other category is up 405,000 or 256.8%. And that's because of the ARPA and CRISA credits that are flowing out to the concessionaires here. Moving over to employments. So year-to-date employments have improved by about 15,000, which is a 3.2% increase. Since 2021, we've seen steady growth every year on average of about 4%. The largest growth was in 2023, where employments grew by 6.3% year over year. Looking at the airlines, American is slightly down at 1,900 fewer employments than last year. However, all the other airlines are up, including Delta, United, Allegiant, and even the charters are up. United has grown the most, adding 12,000 of the 15,000 additional employment. And we expect to see that number to grow next year as they bring in larger airplanes. So moving on to the wrap up. So it's been a bit of a similar story as last time, with total sources up about 2.5 million. And we talked about increasing the CFC rate, increasing the parking rate, and increased usage as a whole. We talked about the rental cars and how we settled up with them for the last few years, as well as mid-year this year. And we will continue to do that on a monthly basis. And then concessions have been up because we're seeing higher sales. Then looking at uses, we talked about how personnel is up because we're more fully staffed and because of wage inflation and insurance. We talked about contracts and materials and how they're up because of things like increased property taxes passed through. And then the ARPA and CRISA credits flowing through. We talked about capital project expenses are down because we just haven't needed to transfer as much operating to capital as we have in past years. So adding this all together, this leaves us with an operating surplus of about $838,000 on the bottom line. And then in summary, I just want to say that passenger employments continue to improve, business continues to build, and we will continue to be good stewards of our earnings as they come in. We'll look to reinvest those earnings for growth and development. We will ensure our travelers have the best possible customer experience at the airport.
I think you said it all. Okay, Commissioners, questions?
Thank you.
Good job.
Presentation.
Good. Thank you.